Hey, YouTube theologians, Pastor Wolfmueller here. A couple of months ago, I was interviewing Dr. Greg Schultz about postmodernism and the destruction of language, and we were talking about the book "What Does This Mean" by Dr. James Voelz, and I made a comment. Dr. Schultz was taking it apart, and I made the comment that I just read the first part and I didn't finish reading it because I could see it wasn't a Christian book. Well, Dr. Voelz saw that video and emailed me and reached out, and we talked on the phone. He said, I'd like to talk about that. So we connected this week and I interviewed him, a long conversation about that topic and lots of other variety of topics. So that is what you are about to see, a conversation that I had with Dr. Voelz. We're talking about the philosophy of language. We're talking about hermeneutics and how to interpret the Bible. A conversation bounced off of the clarity of Scripture, never really got into that, but a question about hermeneutics, about sola scriptura, and so forth. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, are enriched by the conversation, that there's something to grab a hold of. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. You can post those in the notes below. This unedited, I didn't touch up anything or do anything to it, so you got the whole thing. And here you go. Hey, YouTube theologians, Pastor Wolfmueller here with Dr. James Voelz, Professor Emeritus of, well, both seminaries, but most recently the seminary in St. Louis, probably the father of, the Greek father of the Missouri Synod. I would imagine that 90% of the pastors of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod learned their Greek either from you or from your text, mediated through somebody else. Also the author of What Does This Mean? A hermeneutics text, which Dr. Schultz and I were blasting away at a couple of months ago. And Dr. Voelz said, hey, Bryan, you said you read the first 10 pages and that it wasn't Christian, which was, I really appreciate you reaching out and do that to catch me on that. And so let's talk about it. So we're here to talk about hermeneutics, to talk about the text, to talk about the meaning of language, and to talk about anything else that comes up. Dr. Voelz, thank you. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, meanwhile, let me just tell you, meanwhile, I had some interchanges with Greg Schultz, especially about postmodernism. I don't know if did I include you on the long one that I sent to him about the origins of post-structuralism, Derrida, and so on.
No.
Darn it, darn it. I should have asked you so I could have sent you that because after I sent him that email, or wrong conjunction. Since I sent him that email, he has fallen silent. So I don't know, and I know well, he told me at least when we were talking that he was in Africa. I mean, I hope nothing's gone wrong, and it could well be, and I say this in all honesty, it could well be that he's had communication difficulties because when I ran the grad school at the St. Louis Seminary, I remember we had a student from Tanzania who told me that when he went back to Tanzania, at the university there, they had electricity problems, and he could only get on the internet 15 minutes a day. Yeah, so I mean, it's possible stuff happens, but I have not heard from him now for a couple of months, and I have been in, this is a great German word, an Auseinandersetzung with the editor of Christian News, who has, and he's been after me about what I thought of Robert Preuss's critique of using the two natures of Christ as an analogy for the nature of Scripture. And I just want to tell you, Bryan, I sent him a long email on that, which he wasn't pleased with. And I said, well, now I'm going to challenge you to print everything I sent you
Yeah.
and print your responses. And he has just written back and said, no, thanks.
Huh.
So perhaps we shall see, Bryan. perhaps he has fallen silent. But this has been uh, since it was interesting when I saw your broadcast and then what he has been doing against me in Christian news. It all was kind of at the same time. And well, let me just say that this is an advantage. I'm laughing when I say this, Brian. This is an advantage of being retired. I actually have time to deal with this.
Yeah, it's great. Well, so
Yeah,
okay, so let's maybe to start for just lay some groundwork. And I remember, so I went back to say, I wonder why I was so reactive to what you wrote, and
yeah,
so I went and
yeah,
I
yeah.
grabbed it, and it's just like page one preface.
Hmm.
This makes my sort of yee. So I'll what you say. There's a couple lines here. Um, the first is there's no such thing as a neutral reading of the text. So that's the
Hmm.
first thing that makes me say, "Whoa." And then this text is written from a so-called postmodern
Hey,
perspective.
by the way, let me just is this on page 11?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Now, okay, turn the page.
Yeah, okay.
What do you have there as the date?
Advent 1994.
Okay. Now, remember I told you there's this edition?
Yeah.
I changed some stuff, revised July 2013.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting whether uh, whether what you're going to talk about has been changed. Um, and is there anything in your edition? Just look on that page 12. Is there anything? Could you maybe hold it up to me? Is there any? Okay. Okay, that's it. All right. See, I have I have a comment. I have a comment which you can maybe see this preface to the second edition revised,
Yep.
and I may want to refer to that given what you're going to say. So let's proceed.
Okay. The second thing that the little sentence is this text is written from a so-called postmodern perspective, which distrusts claims of neutrality and objectivity in working with evidence of any kind. Much more said below. So that was I was trying to figure out like because I remember at seminary reading this book. I can't remember, it was, I don't think it was a sign, but I remember picking it up and reading that and thinking, you. So that was my gut reaction to that. So and I don't know if both of those ideas would be interested to explore. So the first is the idea of a neutral interpretation of the text, or maybe an authoritative interpretation of the
No,
text.
no, no. Let's stick with neutral.
Okay, so a neutral interpretation of the text, and then the second is the role of postmodern linguistics. But so I don't know which is more interesting to you today to pursue.
Um, well, now let's go to that second paragraph
Okay,
on page 11. Um, so let's just read the full sentence.
okay,
I'm looking at the second sentence of the paragraph starting observers.
okay.
All right. This text is written from a so-called postmodern perspective that distrusts claims of neutrality and objectivity in working with evidence of any kind, but it is the contention of this author that postmodernism, for all its excesses, is not our enemy, but a sort of friend, a late 20th century discovery that in so many ways the perspective of the early church was right. Only believers can truly interpret the sacred books of God for all their worth. See, now it was really interesting to me that you stopped way before that.
Yeah, well, that's it. So, and I'm just to compare the different texts too. So that's a new sentence in mind, but also you added the "for all it's worth" at the end of the
Yes,
sentence.
yes.
So that's really so I am working with a different text, I suppose. So
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
that's part of it.
yeah. And I was kind of thinking that that might be the case when I contacted you.
Yeah, but this is still true that
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah.
I want for the sake of the clarity of the text, I want that to be accessible to all people. So we've always made this distinction that, well, that first of all, that interpreting the text is a spiritual gift. I mean, this has always been our Lutheran understanding of things, and especially our response to Rome, that the Lord gives different gifts to different people, and interpretation is a spiritual gift. But the I think that our doctrine of the clarity of the Scripture means that the text, insofar as it's teaching us what must be believed, is clear even for those who do not have faith, and
Okay.
sometimes clearer for those who don't have faith.
Yeah.
In other words, when the
Okay. Now,
atheist or the Muslim is reading the text, they're not invested in it. They don't have to believe in it. And that actually gives them a tool for reading it with more clarity than the Christian who knows that they're going to be confounded by it or bound by it.
yeah. Now you're kind of all right. It was once said that the definition of heaven is that we can discuss one thing at one time.
Okay.
Okay, you're discussing two things at one time. So I'm going to keep, this is what I do in class. I'm going to keep bringing you back to a single subject. Okay,
Thank you.
so you've introduced the second point. So you've introduced whether there's, let me tell you the two things you've talked about. One is whether there is an neutral or objective reading of the text,
Yeah.
and the other about the clarity of the text. Those are not the same issue.
Okay.
All right.
Can you tell me the difference?
I'm very, very willing to talk to both of these, but I'm not going to talk to both of them at the same time.
Sure.
All right. So let's talk about the first point that you're making about the neutrality objectivity. Here's sort let me, I'm glad we got enough time. Okay. Um, a basic tenet of modernism, which Pace Jean Veith is not our friend. Modernism gave us the closed universe. A basic tenet of modernism is that you can stand fully apart from whatever it is that you are dealing with, observing, and in no way are affected by it, or anything that you have is affecting anything you see. That's objectivity. Okay. Now, the early church understood, and postmodernism is coming back to this, is that simply not true, because in any interpretive enterprise, forget the fact that we're dealing with the scriptures, okay? Any interpretive enterprise, you're bringing something to the party, okay? And what you bring is going to affect what you see. Now, a perfect example of this. Do you have a do you have a Greek New Testament at hand?
Yes.
Okay. Go to John chapter 9.
All right.
This is as good an example as you can find. This is the man born blind.
Yeah.
Okay, and so they see this guy blind from birth. Verse 2, his disciples inquired of him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, hinna, hinna, he be born blind? Now, can a hinna clause express result so that you would say who sinned with the result that he was born blind? Or is result out of the picture, and it's maybe something like purpose, who sinned in order that he be born blind? In other words, somebody had a sin in order for him to be born blind. Now, the decision you make on this, Brian, has nothing to do with anything that you learn about Greek in the scriptures. It has to do with whether or not you take Jim Voelz for Greek or you take John Nordling for Greek. Okay? So, can a hina clause express result? You don't get that from the Bible. See, you get that from Greek grammar, from working with Goodwin, from working with Fred Danker's lexicon and so forth. But you're bringing something to the interpretation of this text. You're bringing your knowledge of Greek. And what the way you understand is going to give you various possibilities. Now, I don't think hina clauses are used for result, which means I've got more work to do on the text. How am I going to understand that hina clause? If you think that it can do result, you're probably going to go in that direction. Notice, none of that's got to do with anything you learned grammatically from the Bible. See, this is all I'm saying with something like this. Now, see, this is why I want to just sideline for this part of our long discussion today. Questions about the clarity of Scripture. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about Scripture and can we access salvation by grace through faith and all that. This is basic interpretive stuff. Let me give you another example. Give you another example.
Well, if before you
All right,
move
well,
on that
go ahead.
example, could you
Yeah.
just so so work me through the so get me to the point of that. So if I say so because okay, there's a couple of different things that you've presented there. So one is that there are certain rules that will uh bound the interpretation of hina in Greek, and that those are disputed. And this is always the goal of the intermediate grammar, right? To undo the things that you learn in your basic grammar. So you get into all these examples, and then the intermediate grammar says, well, here we have a hina result clause, and we know that because we have this text. In other words, there's that point where where like the different examples are kind of backfeeding into the grammars to tell you the meaning of the thing. But what's the result? Like if I think that hina can only is limited to purpose clause and not as a result clause, how does that text come to me in a different way? What are the disciples saying differently about the man who's blind?
Well, what are they saying differently?
Right, 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 right.
Well, uh, there. Let me reverse the way you're saying it.
Okay.
I think it's pretty easy if you think it's result, just to say who sinned with the result that he was born blind. If you don't think you can say that, then the Wolfmueller question comes to the fore. Well, now what are you saying? See, are you saying something like somebody is purposively trying to make him blind? I've got more work to do interpretively as to how I'm going to understand that text. Um, uh, uh, See, it's going to introduce this kind of a thought that somebody has got to sin in order that the person would be born blind, because without sinning, he can't be born blind. So, in other words, that there has to be some cause. God wouldn't just afflict people with blindness apart from there being some other thing. See, I'm getting into all kinds of interesting possibilities of how our actions interact with God's action. Now, let me
It,
just back up just a second. You see, I'm giving you what shall I say? I'm giving you a simple example not one that necessarily has uh, deep theological ramifications for our salvation or something like this. I'm just picking uh, a sort of grammatical example that shows you that your understanding of Greek, A, does not come from the New Testament. It comes from outside the New Testament. In other words, you have a grammar, you have an intermediate grammar, you have a reference grammar like Goodwin or Smythe, and you're bringing all that to um, uh, to the text. Okay, here, let's stick with Hannah. All right. I want you to go now to the Garden of Gethsemane in Mark 14. Go,
Okay.
go to this.
Okay.
Mark 14. You will actually find a real difference in commentaries about this.
I still think that in the John text, the disciples are making a connection between sin and blindness and trying to figure out where the sin belongs. And it doesn't matter if you have a purpose or result clause. I mean, like the text won't let you escape that point. And that's what Jesus has to correct, that we try to draw a line between sin and suffering,
No, no,
sin
no,
and
no, no,
result.
no. You're advancing too far. Um, let's just say, let me put it this way. And this is one of the things I wanted to tell you on the broadcast today. I'm not sure that people understand that in this book, I am trying in the most elementary way to talk about interpreting text, not doing this, that there is this difference and oh, all of a sudden this has great doctrinal implications. No, this might be on the level of you're doing Brian, I was one of the 50 technical advisors for the ESV. All right. So were several other Missouri Synod people like Dean Wenthe and Paul Robbie. Okay. Well, now we're working with the translation that's going to be printed. See, you have to decide how you're going to translate that text. So I'm talking about this most elementary level. We're not talking about, in the end, what's the difference going to be in your sermon? I'm not talking about that level. I'm talking about a very elementary level. Here now, I now just stick with me now. Go to Mark 14:38. Mark 14:38, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I want you to tell me what that hina clause conveys. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot here
Right,
on the
right.
recording. All right. Uh, Watch, be awake, and pray. Hina, you do not come into temptation.
I,
What's the hina?
I just always translate that you would not
Well,
come
you
into
are.
temptation.
All right. You are correct if you think this hina clause is reflecting the expansion of the use of hina in Hellenistic Greek from classical Greek. If you more privilege classical Greek, then you're going to be saying this: watch and pray in order that you do not come into temptation. These are two different thoughts, Brian. One is you pray that you not come, and the other is you pray and you are doing praying in order that you do not come into temptation. See, those are two different thoughts. And again, when you are dealing with the level of translation, you got to make a decision on that.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to make a decision. It depends upon how you privilege your understanding of the expansion of the hint clause in the development of Greek. See, but I'm bringing all that from the outside. I'm bringing all of that from the outside. Um,
Do
you
you
know,
think, okay, so on this, is part of the argument, and this is what I want to explore, that when Mark is writing here,
yeah.
and maybe he's even there in the garden to hear this. He's
No,
maybe he
no, because he took Peter, James, and John.
okay. So he ends up running away with the after he's getting arrested and who's okay, but maybe so. But he's anyway taking the words of Jesus probably in Aramaic, and he is by the power of the Spirit putting it into Greek for us.
Okay.
Do do you think that Mark intends one or the other? In other words, a kind of loose association that, or in other words,
Oh,
uh,
it's not a loose association. No, no, no. That is the use of hina to express an object clause.
okay,
So in other words, pray, it's what you pray. Pray that you do not do it as opposed to purpose. No, I mean
pray
it's not
for the
loose
person. Okay,
association.
okay. So introduce an object clause versus a in order that you do not.
Yeah, a
So
purpose clause.
purpose clause
Yeah.
that Mark had one of those in mind.
Well, boy, um, are I'm surprised to hear you say this because I think you're treading on thin ice when all of a sudden the you're mooting that the authors don't really have any specific idea in mind when they write. I'm just kidding you now, Brian. Uh, yes, I do think that he had one of those in mind. Yes.
Okay,
Hmm.
and do you think that? Okay, that's interesting. Just that is very interesting. So,
Yeah.
um,
And
it,
that, and I'm kind of trying, as an exegete, I'm trying to figure that out. Um, but I'm humble enough to think I may not be right. Um, now let's stick with this text.
yeah,
Um, I don't know if you have my two volumes commentary on the Concordia series on Mark, but what I do with the Garden of Gethsemane scene is some of my best work in both volumes, and I recommend it for your reading. Now let's just go on in verse 38.
okay.
Just go on.
I'm not sure we've pumped verse 39 verse 30. Where were we? I'm not sure we've gotten the first clause
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
fully
But
juiced yet, but
here,
okay.
I'm going to go on. Now, and I'm going to just question you a little bit.
Yeah.
Ta men, pneuma prothumon, willing toward something. He des sarx asthenes. The flesh is weak. Notice you don't have to use the verb to be. It's in predicate position in both places. The spirit is willing, uh, but the flesh is weak. Now, does anything strike you about that phraseology at all?
Um,
I am not trying to trick you.
I mean, we here have the flesh spirit distinction, which is a
No, I'm
theme.
talking about the actual
Just
language.
the text, just the Greek
Yeah.
here.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, we have a mende, uh, uh, n- no, no, it doesn't. But maybe
Okay.
I'm just like I'm
No, no,
used to
no, no,
looking at
no.
it. So,
It doesn't strike other people and commentators either, Brian. But let me tell you what Jim Voelz sees there. We haven't had mende clauses throughout Mark. This is unusual. The men de contrast is highly classical. It's not the normal thing. If you look at the Oxyrhynchus papyri, people do not use this. So all of a sudden, Jesus, in the throes of anguish in the Garden of Gethsemane, is using a mende clause from classical Greek. Now, I'm going to stop. I'm going to say more, but I'm going to stop right here. You notice how I have brought in my knowledge of other stuff about the Greek of Mark and the way Mark writes and saying, he doesn't use this and so on like that, which you didn't know. See, so now immediately I'm bringing something to this text that I know as opposed to what you know. So now the text looks different. See, this is kind of what we're talking about here, saying you're always bringing something to the party, to the meal. Now, now, I have been involved in the six-man St. Louis Seminary performance of the Gospel of Mark. And we discussed this, the six of us who do the performance of the Gospel of Mark. We discussed this, and someone came up with the following idea. They said, "Do you suppose if Mark is received orally, could this possibly be the so-called breaking down of the fourth wall? Do you know what that is in
Yes.
theater terms? The breaking down of the fourth wall. All right. It's what Bruce Willis did in Moonlighting all the time when he would turn to the camera and say, "Can you believe what she just said?" Yeah,
Hmm.
So and so this is actually what we determined to do. So, in other words, if you just kind of watch me here, uh, and I'm going to turn away here. So, when the performance is being done, the person Jesus is talking to the disciples like this, and you and the camera are the audience. Okay, so now watch me. So this is how we did it. Watch and pray that you do not enter into temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And then it goes back. So that it kind of bursts through and actually addresses not only Peter, but the audience at that point. Kind of like in chapter 13 of Mark, let the reader understand.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just wrote
yeah,
that down that because
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
same
yeah.
dispute
That same
in
sort of
Matthew
thing.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You are correct. Okay, now here's my point. The fact that the men de construction is basically not used in Mark, the fact that it is a formal construction, the fact that there's such a thing as breaking down the fourth wall, none of that's in the text. I'm bringing that to the
Okay.
text.
So here's the test. Like, h- how does post-modernity help me get to that modernity couldn't get to that? Because it doesn't seem to me strange to have modern interpreters also wrestling with this, especially let the reader understand.
Yeah,
Or, I mean, there's a handful of, and also in the Gospel of John, where John will break into the dialogue and add his own comments, or like with Mark, with these words, Jesus declared all foods clean.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
the
yeah,
so modern, pre-modern interpreters could also wrestle with those things. Like,
yeah,
what
yeah.
about a
No,
postmodern
no, no.
hermeneutic?
Right, right, right. But here's my point. My point is that the possibilities that you see are sort of brought to you by you to the interpretation. And if all of a sudden somebody, now, Bryan Wolfmueller knows about breaking down the fourth wall. Okay. Maybe somebody else doesn't. And you have to explain to him breaking down the fourth wall. Well, now he knows more. See, now he knows more. Now he knows other possibilities that there might be for this text. Now, I'm taking some interesting ones grammatically, but let's take something that is what I call interpreting on level two, which is not the markings on the page, not the words on the page, but the deeds depicted by the words on the page.
Wait, tell me where to go, but I just want to, so I want to make sure I'm getting, so my question is, so like, the, in some ways it's obvious that, um, that a person who knows more about a particular thing brings more to the text. So it's just, like I'll make this point all the time. Like the only reason I know a sheep before its shearers is silent is because I read Isaiah 53. And that's working backwards because for
Yeah,
me
yeah,
to
no,
get
that's
Isaiah
good.
53, I should
Yeah,
I'm supposed to know about sheep and then I'll know about the Messiah. But I actually know more about the Messiah and his suffering and death than I do about how sheep get sheared.
right,
So,
right,
I mean, Paul talks about, be a good soldier, be a good farmer, be a good athlete. And the more I know about farming in the ancient world, and the more I know about athletics, etc., the more I know about these things.
right.
So, but that's not a unique feature. Like I can't see anybody disagreeing with that. Maybe there are people who would claim that, but I that's not the argument. I don't think.
Well, no, no, no. You're kind of not seeing
All right, that's
the big import of this, and
okay.
that is to say, all interpretation is like this. In other words, this isn't just for tricky parts. You know, you might say the insight of postmodernism is that that you are always involved in the interpretive process and in no way I do this in class. Just watch me here, Brian. I have to take my glasses off so I don't hurt myself. Uh, this is not the nature of interpretation. You have the text, and the text strikes you. You know, no, it doesn't. You are involved, so to speak, uh, with the meaning of the text emerging as you work with it. You are involved at every point with this. And that's why you got to have the right orientation. That's why I went back to the early church. See, that's why the early church said heretics aren't allowed to tell us about the Logos because they have a wrong orientation. See, so, but
I
here,
don't think.
just
Wait. I don't think that's what the early church would say. They would say they have the wrong doctrine. I don't
well,
think.
well, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you can say it whichever way you want, but the fact of the matter is, if you're not interpreting according to the rule of faith, you're not doing the right job on the text. See, something's coming from the outside here that's got to, the text doesn't just leap off the page. It doesn't just leap off the
I
page.
know, but I
You
can't see. So and as you're right, I'm not there yet because I cannot
No, no,
see.
no, that's good. Here, but let me get on to this other example because I've got to pick sort of tricky ones for you here. Um, uh, but let me give you my favorite example.
Okay.
And this is the interpretation on level two in Mark 15:38. Just go to Mark 15:38.
Okay.
Well, actually, you know what's going to be better? Look at it's the same incident. Look at it in Matthew. Let's go to Matthew. Matthew 27, and I'm talking about the rending of the veil of the temple.
Okay.
Uh, so this is. Um, 51, 27:51.
Okay.
Okay. And behold, the curtain of the temple split from top to bottom into two, and the earth shook, and the rocks split. Okay. Now, what is, again, I'm not trying to trick you.
That's right.
What is the meaning of the rending of the veil of the temple?
Oh, that there
Now,
was a
for your listeners now,
yes.
okay, for your listeners and viewers, notice what I mean when I say interpreting on level two. We are not arguing about the words on the page.
Right.
We are talking about the meaning of what they describe, what
Right.
they depict. Okay. So, in other words, what I am interpreting for meaning, and this is what semiotics is about, is interpreting things for meaning. I can interpret the scratchings on the page, that's level one.
Yeah.
But those evoke, what shall I call it, Brian? Pictures in my mind. That is to say, the veil of the temple splitting from top to bottom.
Right.
Now I can interpret the splitting of the curtain from top to bottom. But
Yes.
that's not on the page. That's in your mind. So I am interpreting now the thing that it's describing. I want you to tell me what the meaning is of the rending of the veil of the temple.
Okay. So, and you'll just tell me what different levels there are. So at some point, so this is, I would say, the thing that Matthew here wants us to know is that concurrent with the death of Jesus, that veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place was torn supernaturally, I would add, from or miraculously from the top to the bottom. So that it's telling us of that historic event. And that
Right.
historic event is given to us for most simply to know that the that separation that the Lord instituted between the holy place and the most holy place has now been broken down by his death on the cross.
Okay. Where did you get that?
So tell me which part we were talking about and
Oh,
what,
that the separation between God and man is now
or the separation between the holy and the most holy
yeah,
place.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I suppose it comes from my knowledge of the institution of the holy place and the most holy place from Mount Sinai.
Okay. But why didn't you say though in your explanation something about the separation of God and man?
No, but I think that's a fine application of it. But I wouldn't say it that way. I mean, in some ways, I want to say that the the shadow of the tabernacle has come to its use, and in a profound way, the Lord says, "This is finished now," because the true temple,
Oh,
which is the
okay,
body of
okay,
Christ, has
okay.
been torn. I mean, there's a lot to say about it. I like to preach that the tearing from top to bottom indicates that the Lord is out. He's loose, and so it's not a way making, not making the way for us to go in, but making a way for Him to get out, and He's chasing us down, just like the grave is open. But this is all kind of preaching of the text, I suppose.
No, no, no. I wouldn't say so. I mean, on its basic face, the text is saying that the curtain tore.
Right. So,
Okay,
and this is
and
great
and
because
so
I
now
think
I'm asking you the meaning of the curtain tearing.
fantastic. So I this is what I want to say is that we so if you and I wanted to if for example if I wanted to say the curtain tore so God got out and you want to say the curtain's torn so we can go in, I want to say that's actually an okay thing for us to disagree about. We can actually argue which is it, and maybe it's both or maybe it's neither. The fact that we can't argue about is that the curtain tore and
Right? Yeah, yeah. No, right,
that we
right.
know from the words that the moment that Christ died, that that thing happened, and we can
Okay,
know that it happened, right?
right. But it happened. But there's got to be a. I mean, they didn't say something like the moment Christ died, Jacob in Capernaum tied his mule to the synagogue.
Sure, of course.
Oh, okay. So what is the meaning of that thing tearing? See, I don't think uh, uh, there's something a little odd about your hermeneutics, if you don't mind my
Yeah,
saying
of
here,
course.
because what you're doing is you're saying that it actually has no meaning. In other words, that there is a fact that the curtain tore,
Yes.
and now anything beyond that is simply kind of application. But there's got to be a meaning to it because Matthew is introducing that there. And it's the
Yes.
same with the rock splitting in the next verse and the saints coming out.
Right.
Okay, now, yeah, the rock split and the saints came out. Well, what is the meaning of that?
Uh,
What is the
so
meaning of that?
I am so this might be so I've been reading a lot of Luther on Genesis. And you know this. He has a lot of hermeneutical stuff in there. And he's fighting against the medieval tradition,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah,
And he talks about the meaning and the adornment of the text. And he's pushing this point that the meaning is the history. I mean, not always, because not every text is history,
right.
but the text is delivering to us a particular history, and that is chief and primary. And Luther has all these great things. He says, "You give me the history, do whatever you want with it. Just leave me the history." Like that for him is chief. So I've been articulating like this before. The Bible's a theology book; it's a history book, and it's one of the things that makes me nervous is our tendency to take the Bible and to make it a theology book before it's a history book. I mean, especially with
No,
Genesis
no,
stuff.
no, 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 no.
No.
I have wait a minute here. In the entire 54 minutes we've been talking, I have never suggested anything like that.
Okay, good. No, that's great.
Right? I
Right.
mean, you haven't heard me suggest anything in the Garden of Gethsemane or in the man born blind or in this that this is not true.
But
All right.
there is a difference. So and maybe and so you're 100% right. I have not heard you say that. There is
And I
a
won't say it because I don't believe that it's not true.
but there's a disconnect. So there is a distinction between the words that describe an event and the event itself. So when Matthew wrote down that the temple was torn, it was some years later in a different, well, maybe it was right there. I don't know where he wrote it, but so the writing of the words was different than the event. So
Right?
there's a distinction there. But one of the things that makes me nervous is separating those more and more and more and more and more. So that I was at a Bible study recently where the pastor was teaching John 19 and the resurrection of Jesus. And he was so interested in the words that John chose to use to describe the event that he never actually got to the event itself, the resurrection of Jesus. It was an amazing phenomenon to see. So I worry a little bit that that gap builds. That might not be that might be a different issue that I'm bringing into the conversation. That's not something that you're talking about. But I
Well,
so
no, I have to tell you, and I'm just going to be honest with you now.
sure.
Your method sounds a little dangerous to me in
Okay.
this. In this. Both you and I will agree that this is describing what actually happened, that the
Yep.
curtain tore. Okay. Here's what I'm fearful of when I listen to you,
Okay.
that all of a sudden there are all kinds of interpretations that are now called adornment,
Yep.
which are possible as long as we say that the event occurred. I think that this is simply uh, well, what's the word I want here? Cannon fodder for doing all kinds of crazy stuff with the text. I think you're much better off saying that with the tearing of the veil of the temple, there is actually a meaning to that. Let me give you a couple of meanings. We now have direct access to God. Or the destruction of the temple that Jesus describes in Matthew 24 is now beginning. The kind of proleptic example of something like that. All right. I mean, these folks are not just recording stuff like this for the heck of it. Like they didn't say when this happened, then Jacob in Capernaum tied his donkey to a tree. It's not just what shall I say, a farrago of unrelated events or something like this. Now, let me tell you why I brought you to this
Okay.
text. All right. Does it make any difference if you know that on the veil of the temple was embroidered all of the figures, all of the stars and constellations of the sky, with the exception of the zodiac, so that when that temple curtain split, figuratively, the heavens were actually split. And now you go to Isaiah 64. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains might quake at your presence. And look what we have. The earth trembles and splits, and the heavens actually are rent. At this event, we can see the initial fulfillment of Isaiah 64. And this is reading on level 2, telling us that the death of Jesus is God coming to his people in a decisive way.
No, that's good. That
That's that's no adornment, Bryan Wolfmueller.
well, I
That's
look, I so this actually gets to a point. This I think to a good point of disagreement, because I do want to say, and this is so I want to say that that
well, here, wait, before, while you're, choosing your words, let me just put a capstone on what I wanted to
okay,
say.
okay,
If if you don't know about the design of the temple curtain from Josephus' Jewish War 5, and you don't know Isaiah 64, the interpretation I came up with is completely impossible for you.
right.
See, that's what I'm saying.
So I do want to say that the Lord has given us all that we need to understand the scripture in the scripture itself, that it provides its own context. So I, while I don't, I do want to resist this thing that you're saying, that, hey, this extra, this knowledge that we learn from Josephus or from whatever, uh, gives me the meaning of the text.
I
Uh,
didn't say
uh,
that. No, no, no. I
okay,
didn't
okay,
say
okay,
that.
sure,
I
sure.
said that it was a factor to know about, and then you combine that with Isaiah 64 in the Old Testament, and you realize sort of what's happening there.
I'll give you another example of this that that makes me want to push back. So, Jesus says it's more difficult for a rich man to go into heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. I remember I was listening to someone talk about that text one time, and they were talking about how there was a door, a gate in Jerusalem called the eye of the needle. And it was such a size that only people could fit through. Camels had to get through that gate, camels had to go on their knees and scoot through on their knees to go through the eye of the needle. And they say that knowledge of that particular gate in Jerusalem, well, I don't know where that comes from. Probably someone made it up. But anyway, maybe it's true. I don't know. That tells us what Jesus is saying. And I do kick back instinctively against that, because I don't want to say that I didn't have the text before I knew about that gate. I knew what Jesus was saying when he said it's more difficult for a
Yeah.
rich man to go into heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. I don't need that text. I want to push back in the same way with the stars on the veil and say I didn't need Josephus. I didn't need Josephus to know what Matthew was telling me here already. So I do want to push back. I think against that there is a, well, I don't know. Would you say that knowledge of the veil in Josephus is necessary for understanding what Matthew is telling us there, or how would you put it on a scale, or what do I
Well,
have from the text if I don't have that knowledge of the veil?
well, I if Matthew's written to a Jewish audience, I would think this wouldn't be necessarily hidden from them. Um, Isaiah 64 is standing there, and that's going to, raise the question for you. Um, so you have, um, the scriptures aren't. I think you're going to have to be careful about making the scriptures almost in a vacuum that nobody has any context for what St. Paul is saying or um, uh, yeah, I don't know if I would say that it's necessary, but I think it's a piece of evidence that a lot of people would have known. You probably underestimate how important uh, Jerusalem was. I mean, now I've seen this myself, and maybe you have too. But in Rome, there is the gate where they have depicted the conquest of Jerusalem
Yeah,
by Titus. Yeah, I mean, this was a sort of huge deal that I think we don't really realize what a big thing this was, how well known all of this was in the ancient world and so on like that. You're not talking about that the whole Mediterranean world knew about Capernaum or something like this. I,
sure.
I mean, this was a big time thing. Um, but let's for the purposes of the discussion of the point that I wanted to make, let's just put this aside a second and say, um, let's go back to more Lutheran
Okay.
understandings of this, that we now have full access to God, or the judgment on the temple is beginning.
Right.
Now, those are not adornments. They are attempts to interpret the text on level two, which is interpreting the text, not the marks on the page, but the deeds that they describe. You're interpreting actions. You're
Right.
interpreting actions,
Okay.
activities, or whatever you want it to say. Like um, like the tombs opening and the bodies of the saints coming out. Now, that certainly isn't, well, you know what happened? The bodies of the saints came out. Now we have a bunch of adornments we can do with that. And I mean, surely this has got to be related that the resurrection life is empowered by the death of Christ or something like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But that's not an adornment.
Well, okay. So this is if, but this is, I think this is the point. If someone wanted to preach, I mean, with the veil, look, this is the veil that the Lord instituted, and now the veil has himself, the Lord has himself removed this veil. Okay. This is, I mean, Great. And that for what purpose? That we go in, that he comes out, that both, that there's open communication, that the Lord is done with the temple, as you said. I think these are all right. And you could do really stupid things with it. Like you could explain the tearing of the veil in a really dumb way. Like I don't know exactly what it would be, but like it's the Lord's judgment on the
Veil
well,
makers.
yeah,
Yeah,
perfect. That's perfect. Like the Lord
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
like the color purple anymore
yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
yeah,
Or
yeah. Right, right.
I mean, so I mean, there's a helpful and not helpful, and I suppose a right and a wrong in all of these sorts of things. But um,
Well, that's why they call it interpretation.
right,
See, that's why they call it interpretation,
right.
is that you've got to kind of, what would you say, negotiate all that. And
But
you can't, uh,
so, but I mean, back to your original point, though, and this is what the thing that I keep want to press towards, I suppose, is that like I do not need to be a Christian first to read this text and understand that it's
that's
saying that
right.
the
That's
veil
right.
was torn,
Yeah, you don't.
nor do I need to be a Christian to understand the implications of this
That's right.
thing that the Lord instituted in the first covenant, he's now undoing in the cross. Like there's
That's
no,
right.
I don't have to believe to get that.
No, that is correct. And that's why I said, and as you should know from reading my book, I measure my words very carefully. That's why I say that that you need to be a Christian to read it for all it's worth. This is why there is that diagram. Go to the book, please. There is that diagram in chapter 11, I believe it is. Yes. And by the way, this is another reason why you should get the revised edition because the diagram is wrong in the first edition. It's on page 224. I want you to hold that up to the screen so
Well,
I can see it.
so I don't have, this isn't it, is it?
No, no, no. Page
Two,
224.
okay. Oh, sorry. I was in the, oh, sorry. I was in the wrong spot. 224. All right. This one?
That is correct. Okay. Notice how in the top line goes all the way to the left, and that was incorrect. See what I've done on this one is that the top line does
Yep.
not go all the way to minimum congeniality, simply because a Christian does never have, kind of like a super low congeniality because he believes in Christ. But notice the point of this, and this is the business. Here's where I discuss not fides qua, I mean not fides quae, but fides qua. So, what does personal faith give you? So let's look at that diagram there. Notice how it overlaps. You see that the unbeliever might actually be a better interpreter of texts of the Bible than a believer. Perfect example is my mother. My mother had the strongest faith of any person I knew, and she was a terrible interpreter of the Bible. I mean, if you gave her a parable, it was all over the shop. Okay? If you gave the Gospel of John to Bultmann, he would be able to do an incredible job grammatically. So your point is absolutely right. But notice on that chart, you can't ever get all the way to the right side if you're an unbeliever. And Brian, my example of that is the words of institution.
Okay.
I think that it's going to be almost impossible for an unbeliever not to take them as representational simply because we do use is in a way that doesn't mean is.
But wait, this is one of the earliest accusations against the Christians that they were cannibals.
Yeah.
And when I encounter atheists all the time, this is what they lean into, the Christian cannibalism. They're talking about, look, you eat body and blood. You say it yourself. Jesus himself says it. And that's part of that's part of the Muslim argument against Christianity, that doctrine of the real presence. I mean, maybe an unbeliever would see it as right, but I think that the common case is that the unbeliever is more likely to see it as the body and blood than the Christian, at
Well,
least.
remember, I'm fighting modernism. You cannot, Bryan Wolfmueller, you cannot accuse Muslims of being modernists.
No, 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 sure, but
No,
I'm
no.
thinking,
So I'm
I'm thinking of
talking,
these
and
like
I'm talking always as opposed to modernism.
this would be a good test case to take like the horsemen, the like the atheist, the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse or whatever those guys were, and to see like if Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, how they read the words of institution. But I would put money on the fact that they read them literally. That
Oh, I
they
doubt that. I doubt that very much.
This will be a good
Yeah.
test. So this is great. This will be a great because that's one of the places that I
I
go
mean,
to.
they could. I think they would, I think they would have to relate it to 1 Corinthians 10, though. And, the cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the koinonia of the blood of Christ? I think if they're not going to take it to that, I don't think they would ever take it as real presence.
What happens? So, do you have another example? Because this is, I think, this is good that you would give for how a non-believer can't get all the way to the text.
Can't get all the way. Yeah, I think when you are talking about things like uh, Old Testament, David as a type of Christ, something like that, that there were types that that were fulfilled, Christ fulfilling. There's a kind of a foretaste of Christ and so on like that. I'm just not thinking that they're grooving with that at all. I would commend to your reading. Um, this is one of the, I don't know, 3 or 5 best books I've ever read in my life. Uh, and that is Hans Frey's The Eclipse of Biblical Narrative. Yale University Press, 1974. Now, the
I
whole
have a
thing,
book like that I just got on my shelf, but I don't think that's the one.
yeah, but what I was going to tell you here is that um, the first 50 pages of that, the introduction, are just gold. They're just gold, where he talks about what he calls the reversal of the direction of interpretation. So what happened up even through the Reformation is that the world of the text was seen as the real world, and we fit our world into it. And with Spinoza and the people of rationalism, there was the reversal of the direction of interpretation, so that our world became primary and you fit the world of the text into our world. He's got this great description of all this. It is absolutely fantastic. The rest of the book is great too, but it's very difficult to understand because Fry was an immigrant from Germany and he is a German writing English, which is always a bad idea. Uh, so,
Excuse me.
so take a look at that. I think. See,
I
you
I
how old are you?
48.
Okay, well, okay, you're not real young. Um,
Thanks.
see, see the well, no, no, no. What I was going to say is you don't understand really how modernism has been subverted by postmodernism in the minds of many people. I mean, working in the minds of many people, even you. So, in other words, one of the characteristics, I talk about this in the introductory chapter of What Does This Mean, is this notion of we need models to understand anything. Well, nobody talked about that in nobody talked about that in the world of Descartes. You know, you had direct apprehension of reality. That's the idea of phenomenology in Husserl. You have direct apprehension of the details of reality with no personal involvement in any way. See, now, I think almost nobody today believes that, but that's wouldn't have been true 100 years ago.
Well, okay, but what about 500 years ago? I mean, this is really my I don't know if my mind is modern,
No, no,
postmodern,
no,
whatever.
no, no.
Uh,
500 years ago is pre-modern.
yeah, and this is where I'm interested in. I want to be able to I want to be able to confess the scriptures in the way that they've been confessed by the early church, by Luther, by our Lutheran fathers, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and I want to be able to say the same things about them. In other words, I don't, but and this is maybe the difference. I don't want to start with a sort of a philosophy of language and then bring it to the text. I want to I mean, this is really this I suppose my instinctive reaction is I want to know that the fact that God is incarnate and that I have the voice, the writings of the prophets and the apostles. I want that to be the primary thing. That God is giving me his wisdom and his spirit by his word, that's now shaping
All right.
my
Right.
understanding of
Now,
things.
my problem with what you're doing though is you're kind of at step three already, and I'm at step one.
What
And that is to say, I am in the first instance interested in dealing with the text on level one, then the text on level two, and you've got all this other stuff, but you're going too fast. See, you're going too fast because um, what bothers me about your position is it's let's take the Hina clause in the Garden of Gethsemane
yeah.
is well, it could be purpose, it could be object, but that's okay. We just got to know that Jesus died for our sins. No, 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 no. I'm backing up and saying, hey, I am actually involved in the translation of the ESV. I have to have a way I'm going to translate this. I mean, I just don't think that you or Schultz, for example, understand the nuts and bolts grind of what I'm doing. And indeed, no, you are you're a Fort Wayne grad, right?
Yes.
Yeah. See, Fort Wayne doesn't have that kind of devotion to the utter details of the text that the St. Louis Seminary exegetical department has. Um, I should send you, maybe I'll do this. Let me make a note. I'm going to send this to you. Um, Here. You've got to read this. Um, my Kingsbury lecture of a few years ago, which was entitled um, Doing Biblical Interpretation the St. Louis Seminary Way. Now, this essay was not as opposed to Fort Wayne. It's just a descriptor, because remember, I play in the world of Society of Biblical Literature, International New Testament Society, and everything, in addition to the Fort Wayne Seminary and the Missouri Synod. This is just a descriptor of what happens in the exegetical department of St. Louis. And I think you should read that.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, See, I think you're kind of on to this. This is going to be. I don't mean this to sound unkind, and it really isn't. I'm just doing this as a kind of a observation. Um, I don't think grammar means that much to you because you want to get on to theology so fast. The grammar means everything to me because it is the railroad tracks on which the rest of the stuff rides. And when you get sloppy with the grammar, you get sloppy theologically. So, I mean, it was Luther himself who talked about the fact that if you lose the languages, you lose the gospel, you know. Um, and this is in many ways a kind of a Fort Wayne St. Louis difference. This kind of utter devotion to the linguistic aspect of the text. Thus,
So,
you have people like Bartelt and Robbie, who did their doctorates at the University of Michigan under David Noel Friedman, who were involved in syllable counting in Isaiah and so on, like that. I mean, that kind of a devotion to the detail of the text.
well, I'll take the criticism. That's fine.
Yeah,
It's probably
yeah.
true, but I'm not 100% sure that it gets to the heart of the critique. In other words, like I think I could still be utterly devoted to the grammar and not have a postmodern theory of language, right? I mean, those two are not twins with one another.
Um, no, no, no.
And I'll tell you why the
I'm
postmodernism
not
just
sure. Well, no, no. I'm not sure. You keep using that phrase, and I'm not sure that that phrase is right.
a postmodern theory of
Postmodern
language.
theory of language.
Okay.
No, because I am not embracing Derrida, Pache, Greg Schultz. I mean, Greg Schultz, I need to send, let me put this down. I need to send you this long email that I sent to him about um, postmodernism and how, see, one of his problems is that I'd be interested to know, because I don't think you're like this, but I think he is extremely reactive to terms. Like he sees the term postmodern and all of a sudden there's an explosion in his head or something, as opposed to actually seeing what the guy's talking about.
Well,
So I'm going to send you um, here, Pomo email, and I'm going to talk to you. What I want to we should have another session on that email because what it does is describe how the what happened in the late 19th, early 20th century with quantum physics basically changed everything. It changed the view of how people interact with the world and so on. I have a
well,
reference to that in this email to him, and I
okay.
want you to take a look at this.
I'd be interested and I think we talked about this too, trying to facilitate a conversation between the two of you guys, which I think would be great. And I think that's right. I think you're right. He and I mean, I really appreciate him. He teaches me philosophy, which is something I don't know
Mhm.
about. So I need to learn a lot of things. I don't like mm, I I understand this quantum physics thing. I also just I mean, I don't understand quantum physics. Sorry. I understand this assertion that quantum physics puts everything in, I mean, this kind of scientific theory of relativity that then it is reshapes everything else. But I mean, I'm also just resistant to that because I want to
That's
be able
right,
to.
because no, 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 and this is my contention. And I think after I described this, Schultz didn't correspond with me anymore. The fact of the matter is, our view of reality kind of got affected by quantum. But in a practical sense, it makes no difference.
Right.
This is really what's important, is it makes no difference. And this is why I'm talking about practically now, okay? This is why Derrida is wrong. See, the biggest problem that Greg Schultz has is he thinks that the theories of Derrida, well, in fact, I think he said this on your podcast, is all you need to know about postmodernism is the linguistic theory of Derrida. This is simply wrong. And there are plenty of postmoderns who disagree with Derrida. And the fact of the matter is, Derrida had a concern, but his solution to it is incorrect. Okay? So I describe all this in the email, and I want to talk to you about this. Do not think that I operate with some kind of a thing. See, the biggest problem with Greg Schultz is his notion that if you at all deal with any of this, a text can, quote, mean anything you want it to mean. Not only is that absurd, that is actually malicious. That is malicious. Nobody, you can't find any writings that I have where I say a text can mean anything you want it to mean. And any notion that that's what, you know, what's going on in what does this mean is a text can mean anything you want it to mean is just a malicious lie. There is not one thing in there that suggests that at all. And it certainly isn't. Now, do you have my latest book, Principles of Biblical Interpretation for Everyone?
No.
Now, well, you have to get this because this is this without the mumbo jumbo. Okay? Same stuff. Same stuff. It's actually better in some ways, Brian, because I actually discuss, which I don't discuss in the other book, I actually discuss issues of the clarity of Scripture and so on. There's a real nice section on the canon and so forth. Um, uh, the uh, yeah, it just the I just don't know where Greg got the idea that semiotics is expressive and it means that a text can mean anything it wants. I I don't know of anybody who says that in our circles.
Uh,
Now, I'm not saying nobody says it, but I am saying that nobody I know in our circle says it. Derrida might say it, but that would be rejected.
I don't know. And so I'll try to work on that to see that to mash the two of you guys up because I don't know. I don't want to either. I don't want to defend him or I mean he's his own man.
That's
He's a
a
friend.
little
So
different conversation. I want to talk to you. Okay? I want to have another conversation with you. And I'm going to send you this stuff. Um, I have to say I'm bothered by this conversation about your theory.
okay,
I think that your theory is sort of medieval, which is, what we worry about in the text is facticity, and then we basically do adornments.
okay.
And I think this is highly problematic.
Tell me why.
Uh, because I don't think it's the way language works. As I say, you're sort of contending that after the death of Jesus, when there's a description that the veil of the temple tears, that it actually doesn't have a meaning.
Oh no no.
No, 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 that's, see, you said we're all agreed it's factual. Okay. We're all agreed
Okay.
it's
Yeah
factual.
yeah yeah.
Now you're working on the adornments thing. And I'm saying, no, that Matthew, has that there because there is a meaning to that as as he's got it placed in the story and everything like that. And
Yeah.
it isn't just that we kind of do cool theological applications.
No, I
And
agree
that's
with
the
that.
kind of thing Wally Dagner used to do at the seminary, and I would get after him on this when I was on the Fort Wayne faculty. I remember him preaching on John 6 and treating John 6 as Eucharistic. And I said, Wally, how can you treat it as Eucharistic? You know you don't believe that. He says, "Well, that was an application." No, I'm full of that.
No,
That's
I agree. I think my pushback, so maybe there's 2 points there, but that number one, the history is first, and then number two, that um, yeah, I mean, it could even be that Matthew's giving this to us from a different angle than Mark's giving it to us. That's all fine.
well,
I
of
don't, I don't think,
course, of
but
course. That's
but
the idea of interpreting the four gospels,
What
right?
where I'm pushing back a little bit is that I need Josephus to understand the rending of the veil to fulfillment of Isaiah 64. So I think my pushback is there. And maybe I do have a problem with like another example of I don't what's a good example of this is if you take the days of creation as a litany against the gods of Egypt, for example, and that the way that Moses presents the days of creation is a takedown of all the false gods of Egypt that was holding them into captivity and so forth and so on. And I said, well, okay, I think that's fine, but if I want to do the I don't want to I want to say, look, the days of creation are there because the Lord created the world this way, and He tells
Yeah,
us
yeah,
about
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And then if
Well,
in
no,
other words,
that's a different example. That's a different example. That because that's an example of uh, sort of what his purpose is in writing it. I'm not talking about Matthew's purpose. I'm talking about in the narrative, what is the meaning in the narrative
mhm.
of that juxtaposed to Jesus's death. And I mean, say you don't want to do Josephus, fine by me. Do something like the destruction of the temple is beginning,
Right,
or we now have access to God, or something like that.
right, right.
But
And
it's not
I think
just
there's an
sort of a
and there, but yeah.
bare fact. It's see, to me, you're treating this as if the next sentence after the death of Jesus is, and the centurions fed their horses.
Yeah,
No,
wow. Yeah, yeah.
see, no, it's not that.
Of course
So,
not. No, no, no. That's right. So, I mean, I'm glad I've got you worried. I'm not sure that is what you should be worried about. I mean, I, I think I am fighting a different battle.
well,
So,
see, I actually think you are. No, this is uh, um, this is actually an excellent observation. I think you are fighting a different battle. Um, I am fighting a battle against modernism. Remember, I wrote this book initially in the middle 1990s. Okay. And this is the high time of historical critical method. And I mean, well, no, the historical critical method's coming under attack, but it's still strong. It's still very strong. And uh, so I'm fighting Germans who think that everything natürlich, naturally, that no, it's not natürlich, the interpretation of the text is not leaping off the page at you like that. You are actually engaged in interpretation. I think you're right. I am engaged in kind of a different context of this than you are.
yeah. Well, Dr. Voelz, thank you. I know we'll call it quits for part one at least here, and I thank you for your engagement and for reaching out and
Yeah.
for taking us all around. It'll be so. Send me the stuff. I'll engage in it, and we'll be back for part two. Thanks so much.
Yeah, yeah. It would be good if you would actually get the second revised edition of this, because it's interesting. All of a sudden, you're starting to pick on stuff, and then there were actually changes there. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
you can't blame a guy for working with the source text, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah. I
prefer
can
the
blame you for not working with the latest text.
I prefer I go with that text crit model that the older text is to be preferred.
Oh, you do you? Okay. That's great. Yeah.